Howdy, partners. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about Texas and kind of how Texas becomes part of the United States. So you should have a worksheet that says the Americanization of Texas at the top, and it's a cause and effect chart with some of them filled in. So we're going to be going through that today. So a couple things just to kind of background for you. So first of all, Americanization. You should remember that word. We've talked about that word before a little bit. So Americanization means becoming more American. So that should imply to you that Texas was not American, right, at first. Texas was actually a colony of Mexico. Mexico won its independence from Spain in the early 1800s, and Texas was part of its territory. So what we're going to kind of see today is how Texas goes from being part of Mexico to being something that is wanted by the United States, and we'll kind of see how that happens. So something just to keep in mind as we're going through this. So you may have heard the phrase before, don't mess with Texas, right? People of Texas are very proud, right? So today we're going to see kind of why that is, why you shouldn't mess with Texas, what is it about Texas that you shouldn't mess with. So we'll kind of get to see where that comes from today. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So we're starting in 1821. So you already see the effect here that Mexico is inviting Americans to settle Texas. So what is it about Texas that's going to make them want to invite us? So essentially there's this land that we call Texas that Mexico wants to settle, but it's kind of got this reputation for being a really harsh territory. There's a lot of Native Americans there, and a lot of people in Mexico have heard this reputation and don't really want to move. But Mexico really wants to kind of like increase the population there. So they call out to the United States and they're like, hey y'all, it'd be really cool if you like came out here and started settling. So a lot of American settlers who are looking for land are like, sure, why not? We'll go, free land, right? One of these guys is this guy right here, Stephen Austin. You see that his nickname is the father of Texas because he was one of the first people that led a group into Texas from America. And he's going to play a really important role. So all of a sudden you've got all these Americans starting to move to Texas, right? And remember, we were invited, but we were invited with some conditions. Conditions like you can't bring slaves with you. You need to convert to Catholicism. You need to learn Spanish, right? Become a part of Mexico. Well, that starts to happen as people are moving in. 1822, Stephen Austin, some of these others start to establish colonies. And Americans really like Texas. They're like, this is a pretty cool place. Like we could work with this, right? And so as they're starting to do this, a lot of Americans are like, it'd be really cool if this was part of the United States, right? Manifest destiny. We have the right to this territory, right? God likes us best, remember? And so it'd be really cool if we could like pull the American border out through Texas and maybe we can have Texas. So this is kind of this talk that a lot of people starting to have and like, I think this should be part of the United States. By 1830, the Mexican government's kind of annoyed at all these Americans. Because remember how I said they weren't supposed to have slaves, they needed to learn Spanish and had to convert to Catholicism? Yeah, they weren't doing that. No, Americans didn't. They were like, no, I don't want to learn Spanish. No, I'm going to keep English, right? I don't have to learn the language of your country. Sound familiar? Also, didn't want to convert to Catholicism. And a lot of Americans that were moving in were bringing slaves with them. A lot of them were Southerners, okay? So by 1830, Mexico comes a little bit concerned and they start to restrict immigration, saying like, we know we invited you guys, but now we want you to stop. Like they're trying to close the borders of Texas to keep Americans out of Mexico. This is kind of sounds a little backwards from today, doesn't it? So a lot of the Americans that have been moving to Texas or have been planning to move to Texas, they don't really like this development, okay? So these are some of those important people. There's Stephen Austin. Again, this guy over here is a guy named Santa Anna. He is the president of Mexico. He's going to be pretty important in all of this, so keep him in mind. So in 1833, Stephen Austin goes to Santa Anna and said, look, man, we know y'all are Mexico, but there's a lot of Americans living here now, like a lot of Americans. Wouldn't it be better if we could like govern ourselves? How do you think the president of Mexico is going to take to this request? Yeah, about that good, right? Austin actually gets arrested and put in prison for trying to start a revolution. Like, dude, no, you treason, prison, go, out, right? Because basically that would be like, the president of Mexico walking into the White House and being like, you know what? we think Texas should go back to Mexico. Wouldn't it be great if we had some self-government? That's not going to happen, right? So Austin gets arrested and imprisoned for trying to start this revolution. But by 1835, he gets out of prison. He returns to Texas, and he's like, look, y'all, they treat us like crap. We got to go to war with these people, right? So he calls on the people of Texas to arm themselves against the Mexican government, okay? Now remember, this is not an American war. This is a war of American citizens in Texas. That's important to keep in mind. But Texas moved to this fortress known as the Alamo. It's this old mission that had been built in the 1700s. And so they kind of think, like, what we're going to do is we're going to hold up here and regroup, get everybody together, and we'll be able to fight from here. Okay, there's some men, women, and children all hold up at the Alamo. And so Santa Anna sends troops to Texas in order to put down this little rebellion that's about to happen. So you might have heard the phrase, remember the Alamo, right? So remember the Alamo comes because in February of 1836, the Texans and Mexicans clash. There's a 12-day siege where basically the Mexicans are keeping them tight into the fortress. They can't get out. They can't get supplies. The Texans are able to hold them off. However, the Mexicans eventually break in. All 187 Americans die. However, as you can see, they take quite a few Mexicans with them, right? However, they are all killed. And this becomes kind of the rallying cry for the rest of Texas. There were some pretty famous people there, such as David Bowie, the inventor of the Bowie knife. Davy Crockett was there as well. So remember, the Alamo kind of becomes the cry of the war in Texas. So this is a picture of the front of the Alamo today. It used to be a much bigger, more enclosed mission, but today really like the front is all that's left, and it's still a really popular tourist attraction in Texas today. Some of the women and children were spared. It was mostly just the men who were killed. This is what the Alamo might have looked like in 1836, so you can see that it was a much bigger fortress back in that day where they were all holed up, so that's how you know 187 people were holed up in there. But the Alamo kind of becomes the symbol for the people of Texas, for Mexican brutality and for the fighting spirit of the men of Texas, right? So on April 21st, 1836, the Americans lead a surprise attack at San Jacinto, saying, remember the Alamo, right? Like, we're going to defeat you guys, we're going to have our own little war. So it's basically like the Texans strike back after the Alamo. 630 people are killed. Santa Anna is captured. Santa Anna actually had tried to escape wearing women's clothing, and they captured a bunch of women and realized that one of the men that they had captured, or one of the women that they had captured, was actually the president of Mexico. Like, way to go, dude. But the effect here is that the Mexican president, they basically gives up, right? Santa Anna had actually been kicked out of office, and the Mexican president is like, you know what? You guys, totally right. Form your own government. We can't do this anymore. So Texas becomes its own independent country. Okay? Texas becomes what is known as the Lone Star Republic. So it was a republic by itself. They form a government. They elect Sam Houston as president. If you think about the names of the men, Houston and Austin are two of the biggest cities in Texas. That's because they were two of the biggest names in Texas at the time. They elect their own president. They write their own constitution. And Texas becomes its own independent country forever and ever and ever, right? Don't nice to Texas. Yay, we're done. Except that we're not, because Texas today is not an independent country, right? Almost immediately after Texas becomes its own country, they're like, man, running a country is hard, right? So they start to seek annexation into the United States. There's a couple reasons for this. One, because it is hard to run your own country, you know. But also there's like this trade issue. If they want to trade with the United States, they have to pay tariffs if they are their own country. Whereas if they're a state, they don't have to pay those extra taxes. It's harder to immigrate into the United States. And remember, most of the people there are Americans anyway, right? So in 1838, they start to seek annexation to become a state of the Union. And the U.S. is kind of divided over this. The South is for it, but the North is against it. Okay, why is the North against it? Let's think about this for a second. What is it? Use your brains. The South is for it, the North is against it. So probably because of slavery, right? Texas will be a slave state. There's a lot of slaveholders already in Texas. So they are going to join the Union as a slave state, which most of the North is not crazy about. But there's not, it's a little unclear. The debate's in Congress mostly, but it's unclear what the American people really believe. So are we going to allow Texas to enter as a state? And we don't really know what the American people want until this guy runs for president. His name is James K. Polk. He's known as the dark horse candidate. Basically what that means is like he came out of nowhere and nobody really expected him to win. He's actually North Carolina born. Don't let the people of Tennessee tell you he's from Tennessee. He's not. He's from North Carolina. And he runs on a pro-expansionist policy, saying that we need Oregon, we need Texas, we need all of this, right? So do you think he wins? He does. He is elected on his pro-expansion campaign. So what does that tell you about what the American people want? They want Texas. So in 1845, the Lone Star Republic is admitted to the Union as the 28th state and becomes a slaveholding state, right? So this is great. We've got a new state. Problem solved. We never have another issue ever again with Texas or Mexico, right? Yeah, not quite. Because here's the thing, all right? So this is the territory we got. This is what Texas looked like back in the day. It's a little different than what it looks like today, right? But there's two rivers south of Texas. There's the Rio Grande River, which runs like here, and there's the Nueces River, which runs about like right here. Mexico thinks that Texas ends at the Nueces River, which runs up here. America thinks Texas ends at the Rio Grande River down here, all right? So we actually, by 1846, U.S. and Mexico starting to get into some major disagreements about where the border of Texas actually is. And the long-term effect is going to be that we actually get into a war with Mexico over the border of Texas. So they gave Texas to us as a state. They were fine with that. But it's where Texas is, or where Texas ends, that we have a really issue with. So this kind of wraps up how Texas became part of the United States from Mexico. We, in class, will go a little bit more into kind of some of this and start looking at the Mexican-American War. So I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.